The observation deck of Galactic Station Nexus Prime hummed with nervous energy as representatives from 12 different species gathered around the massive viewing portal. Through the reinforced transparent aluminum, they could see the most dangerous creature in known space floating in its specialized containment field. The Vortac predator cub was barely 3 meters long, but, even in its juvenile state, it commanded absolute terror from every sentient being who laid eyes upon it. Its obsidian scales rippled with bioluminescent patterns that hypnotized prey before the kill, while rows of crystalline teeth gleamed like sharpened diamonds. 6 eyes, each the size of a dinner plate, scanned the observation deck with predatory intelligence that made seasoned warriors step back instinctively. Admiral Kethran of the Zephyrian fleet adjusted his ceremonial armor nervously. As the station commander, he had overseen the capture of this creature after it had single-handedly decimated 3 research outposts in the Outer Rim. The adult Vortacs were classified as extinction-level entities, capable of wiping out entire colonies before backup could arrive. Even this cub had killed 47 armed security personnel during its capture. "The bidding will commence shortly," announced Dr. Velix, the Mantarian xenobiologist overseeing the auction. Her compound eyes clicked as she reviewed her datapad. This specimen represents a unique opportunity to study Vortac physiology in a controlled environment. The starting bid is set at 50 million galactic credits. The assembled buyers shifted uncomfortably. The hegemony wanted the creature for their biological weapons program. The Terran Confederation had sent a representative, though nobody expected the humans to bid seriously. The Kreloth Empire saw it as a trophy for their emperor's private menagerie. Various scientific institutions hoped to unlock the secrets of Vortac regeneration and adaptive evolution. What none of them mentioned was the real reason for their interest. 3 days ago, long-range sensors had detected a Vortac migration fleet heading toward the galactic core. Millions of the adult predators were moving through space like a living plague, consuming everything in their path. Every species in the galaxy was desperately searching for any advantage against the coming swarm. Ambassador Thalnix from the Crystalline Collective raised a tentative appendage. "Has anyone successfully established communication with a Vortac specimen?" Dr. Velix's mandibles clicked in what passed for a laugh among her species. "Communication? Ambassador, Vortacs don't communicate. They consume. This cub has already shown remarkable intelligence in its escape attempts, but it views every living thing as either prey or competition. 17 different xenolinguists have attempted contact. The creature responded by trying to dissolve the containment field with its acid secretions. The human representative, a woman named Dr. Sarah Chen, had been quietly observing from the back of the group. She was unremarkable by galactic standards, standing barely 1.7 meters tall with brown hair pulled back in a practical ponytail. Her clothes were simple and functional, lacking the elaborate uniforms and ceremonial armor worn by the other delegates. Most of the aliens had dismissed her presence entirely. "What about environmental enrichment?" Dr. Chen asked, her voice carrying clearly across the observation deck. The room fell silent. Several delegates turned to stare at the human with expressions ranging from confusion to outright amusement. General Vextar of the Crothan warclans let out a rumbling laugh. "Enrichment? For a killing machine? Human, your species' tendency toward sentimentality is well documented, but this creature is a weapon of biological perfection. It requires no enrichment beyond targets to hunt." Dr. Chen stepped forward, ignoring the general's condescending tone. "Every intelligent species requires mental stimulation. Isolation and sensory deprivation can cause psychological damage that manifests as increased aggression and self-destructive behavior. Has anyone considered that the creature's escape attempts might be symptoms of distress rather than pure predatory instinct?" The laughter that rippled through the assembled delegates was sharp and dismissive. Dr. Velix clicked her mandibles rapidly, a sign of extreme agitation among Mantarians. "Dr. Chen, with respect to your species' achievements, you clearly don't understand what we're dealing with here. Vortacs are apex predators that have evolved beyond the need for social structures or environmental complexity. They exist in the vacuum of space, feeding on stellar radiation and whatever organic matter they encounter. This specimen doesn't experience distress in any way your mammalian brain could comprehend." As if summoned by the discussion, the Vortac cub suddenly pressed against the containment field, its 6 eyes focusing on the observation window. The assembled delegates instinctively stepped back, but Dr. Chen moved closer to the viewing portal. The creature's bioluminescent patterns shifted from the aggressive reds and oranges it had displayed earlier to softer blues and purples. Its massive eyes, each one larger than Dr. Chen's entire head, tracked her movement with startling precision. "Fascinating," she murmured, pulling out a small device that began recording biometric data through the station's sensors. "Look at the pattern modulation. Those color changes aren't random threat displays. There's a mathematical progression in the sequence." "Coincidence," scoffed Professor Yithlak from the Cerebral Institute. "You humans have a documented tendency to see patterns and intelligence where none exist. It's called pareidolia, and it's one of your species' greatest weaknesses." But Dr. Chen wasn't listening. She had noticed something that made her heart race with excitement. The vortex color patterns were following a Fibonacci sequence, the mathematical pattern found throughout nature. The creature was demonstrating abstract mathematical thinking, something that had never been documented in any previous encounter with its species. She slowly raised her hand and placed it against the viewing portal. The vortex cub tilted its massive head, studying her gesture. After a moment, it extended one of its smaller manipulator arms and pressed it against the containment field directly opposite her hand. The observation deck erupted in shocked gasps and alarmed chittering from various species. Security alerts began blaring as the station's automated systems detected the creature's movement toward the containment boundary. "Step away from the viewport immediately." Admiral Kethran barked, his hand moving to his sidearm. "That thing is trying to establish a breach point." "But, Dr. Chen remained perfectly still, maintaining eye contact with the massive predator. The vortex patterns had shifted again, this time cycling through the entire visible spectrum in waves that seemed almost musical in their rhythm. "It's not trying to escape," she said quietly. "It's trying to communicate." The statement sent another wave of disbelief through the assembled delegates. General Vextar stepped forward aggressively, his massive frame towering over the human scientist. "Impossible. Vortex don't communicate with prey species. They hunt, they kill, they consume. That creature sees you as nothing more than a potential meal." Dr. Chen finally turned away from the viewport, her expression calm but determined. "General, in the past 3 minutes, this creature has demonstrated mathematical reasoning, pattern recognition, and deliberate communication attempts. It responded to my gesture with a mirrored action, which indicates social awareness. The color patterns follow complex mathematical sequences, suggesting abstract thought processes." "Ridiculous anthropomorphism," sneered Ambassador Thalnix. "Your species projects consciousness onto everything from your primitive computational devices to meteorological phenomena. This creature is reacting to stimuli, nothing more." The debate was interrupted by Dr. Velix's urgent announcement. "All delegates, please prepare for the auction to commence. Bidding will begin at 50 million credits for this unique vortex specimen." As the representatives moved toward their designated bidding stations, Dr. Chen lingered at the viewport. The vortex cub had curled into what appeared to be a resting position, but its eyes remained fixed on her location. The bioluminescent patterns had dimmed to barely perceptible flickers. She thought about the migration fleet heading toward populated space. Millions of adult vortex, each one a living weapon of mass destruction. Every military force in the galaxy was preparing for war, building bigger weapons and stronger shields. But what if they were approaching the problem from the wrong angle entirely? The bidding began with the hegemony offering 60 million credits. The Kreloth Empire quickly countered with 75 million. As the numbers climbed higher, Dr. Chen made a decision that would change the course of galactic history. 150 million credits, she announced clearly. The observation deck fell completely silent. Every eye, stalk, and optical sensor turned toward the human scientist in absolute shock. Admiral Kethran was the first to recover his voice. "Dr. Chen, the Terran Confederation's approved budget for this acquisition was 10 million credits. You don't have authorization to bid at that level." Dr. Chen smiled calmly. "Actually, Admiral, I'm not bidding on behalf of the Confederation.
This is a private acquisition funded by the Chen Foundation for Xenobiological Research. The revelation sent another wave of shocked murmurs through the assembled delegates. The Chen Foundation was legendary in scientific circles, funded by the vast fortune of Dr. Chen's grandfather, who had developed the hyperdrive navigation systems that made galactic civilization possible. But nobody had expected them to bid on something like this. Dr. Velix's compound eyes clicked rapidly as she processed the bid verification. The bid is confirmed. Dr. Chen, are you certain you understand what you're purchasing? This creature has killed dozens of trained security personnel. I understand exactly what I'm buying, Dr. Chen replied firmly. A highly intelligent being that has been misunderstood and mistreated by everyone who has encountered it. General Vextar's voice rose to a threatening roar. You're making a catastrophic mistake, human. That thing will kill you the moment you're in the same room with it. Dr. Chen looked back at the Vortak cub, which had raised its massive head and was watching the proceedings with obvious interest. Its patterns had brightened again, cycling through what she was beginning to recognize as emotional responses rather than simple threat displays. Maybe, she said quietly. But I'd rather die trying to understand than live knowing I condemned an intelligent being to a life of captivity and exploitation. The auction concluded 20 minutes later with Dr. Chen as the successful bidder. The other delegates departed in various states of outrage, disbelief, and morbid curiosity about how quickly the human would meet her demise. As the observation deck cleared, Dr. Chen remained at the viewport, studying her new acquisition. The Vortak had moved closer to the containment field again, its massive form filling most of the visible space. What am I going to call you? She mused aloud. The creature's response was immediate and stunning. Its bioluminescent patterns shifted to form distinct geometric shapes that pulsed in sequence. Dr. Chen quickly activated her recording device and began analyzing the pattern. The shapes repeated 3 times in exactly the same sequence, like a name being spelled out in an alien language of light. Nova, she whispered, translating the stellar formation the creature had displayed. You want to be called Nova. The Vortak's patterns flared bright blue, then settled into gentle waves of green and purple. Dr. Chen had never seen anything so beautiful or so terrifying in her entire life. Admiral Kethran approached from behind, his expression grim. Dr. Chen, I have to advise you that this station cannot provide adequate security for a transfer of this creature to civilian custody. The insurance liability alone would bankrupt the station. That won't be necessary, Dr. Chen replied. I'll be conducting my research here, with your permission. The Chen Foundation is prepared to lease laboratory space and fund additional security measures. The Admiral's expression shifted to one of professional interest. Private funding was always welcome on a frontier station operating on tight budgets. What kind of security measures? He asked carefully. Dr. Chen turned away from the viewport for the first time since the auction ended. None that involve weapons or restraints. I want to try something that's never been attempted with a Vortak before. Which is? Treating it like the intelligent being it obviously is. 3 hours later, Dr. Chen stood outside the containment facility wearing a simple environmental suit. She had refused all offers of armed escorts and defensive equipment, carrying only a small bag of research materials and what appeared to be a child's toy. The station's senior staff watched nervously from the observation booth as she approached the containment field controls. Dr. Velix had insisted on monitoring the encounter for scientific purposes, while Admiral Kethran kept a finger hovering over the emergency containment protocols. Dr. Chen, please reconsider this course of action, the Admiral's voice crackled through her comm unit. We can arrange for remote interaction protocols that don't require direct exposure. Negative, Admiral, Dr. Chen replied calmly. If Nova is as intelligent as I believe, it will know the difference between genuine interaction and observation through barriers. She paused at the containment field controls, looking through the energy barrier at the massive creature beyond. Nova had positioned itself in the center of the chamber, its 6 eyes fixed on her approach. The bioluminescent patterns were cycling through rapid sequences that Dr. Chen was beginning to read as emotional states. Hello, Nova, she said clearly, knowing her voice was being transmitted through the chamber's speakers. My name is Sarah. I'm going to lower the containment field now. I hope you understand that I'm trying to help you.
The station staff held their collective breath as Dr. Chen's hand moved toward the field controls. General Vextar had predicted she would be dead within 30 seconds of field deactivation.
The betting pool among the security staff favored 15 seconds. As the containment field powered down with a soft electronic hum, Nova rose to its full height. Standing upright on its powerful limbs, the creature towered over Dr. Chen by more than 2 meters.
Its crystalline teeth gleamed in the chamber's lighting, and the acid scent of its chemical secretions filled the air.
Dr. Chen stepped into the chamber. For a long moment, predator and human regarded each other in absolute silence. Nova's massive head tilted slightly, studying the small figure before it. The bioluminescent patterns had stopped their frantic cycling and settled into steady, pulsing waves of blue and green.
Dr. Chen slowly reached into her bag and withdrew the object she had brought. It was a simple sphere made of reflective metal, designed to create complex light patterns when it rotated.
I brought you something, she said quietly, holding the sphere out in her open palm.
It's called a puzzle sphere.
It creates patterns when you manipulate it.
Nova leaned forward, its massive head moving within striking distance of the human. The observation booth erupted in warning shouts, but Dr. Chen remained perfectly still. The creature's smallest manipulator arm extended cautiously, touching the sphere with surprising delicacy. As it made contact, the sphere began to rotate, casting dancing reflections throughout the chamber. Nova's reaction was immediate and profound. Its entire body shimmered with bioluminescent patterns that matched the sphere's reflections, creating a symphony of light that filled the chamber. The creature's 6 eyes dilated with what could only be described as wonder. For the next hour, Dr. Chen sat cross-legged on the chamber floor while Nova played with the puzzle sphere. The creature demonstrated remarkable manual dexterity, manipulating the object to create increasingly complex patterns. When it discovered that different touch pressures created different effects, it began experimenting systematically, like a scientist conducting research.
Incredible, Dr. Velix whispered from the observation booth.
It's demonstrating tool use, experimental methodology, and aesthetic appreciation simultaneously.
Admiral Kethran was recording everything for his report to Galactic Command. How is she still alive?
Every tactical analysis indicated immediate aggression.
What they were witnessing contradicted decades of Vorthak research.
The creature wasn't behaving like a mindless predator at all. It was acting like a highly intelligent being encountering stimulation for the first time in its life. As the session continued, Dr. Chen began introducing simple mathematical concepts, using the sphere's patterns to demonstrate geometric relationships. Nova responded eagerly, quickly grasping concepts that took most species years to develop.
When Dr. Chen finally stood to leave, Nova's patterns dimmed noticeably.
The creature moved closer, its massive form looming over the human scientist. I have to go now, Dr. Chen said gently.
But I'll be back tomorrow. Would you like to keep the sphere?
Nova's response was to carefully place the puzzle sphere in the exact center of the chamber, then back away from it slowly. The message was clear: it was a gift to be treasured, not consumed or destroyed. As Dr. Chen exited the chamber and the containment field reactivated, Nova settled into a resting position but kept its eyes fixed on her retreating figure. The bioluminescent patterns had shifted to what Dr. Chen was beginning to recognize as the creature's version of contentment. In the observation booth, the assembled staff sat in stunned silence. Everything they thought they knew about Vorthaks had just been challenged by a single human scientist and a children's toy. Sir, Dr. Velix said quietly to Admiral Kethran, I think we need to reconsider our entire approach to this species.
The Admiral nodded grimly, thinking about the migration fleet still approaching inhabited space. Dr. Chen, this is Admiral Kethran. Can you join me in my office?
I think it's time we discuss the real reason everyone wanted that creature. As Dr. Chen made her way through the station corridors, she couldn't shake the image of Nova's eyes watching her leave. There had been something almost pleading in that gaze, a loneliness that transcended species boundaries. She had no idea that her simple act of kindness was about to change the fate of the entire galaxy.
Admiral Kethran's office was a study in controlled chaos. Star charts covered every available wall surface, showing the projected path of the Vorthak migration fleet.
Red markers indicated colonies that would be in the swarm's path, while defensive positions were marked in blue. The mathematics were stark and unforgiving. Current galactic military forces could delay the swarm, but they couldn't stop it. Dr. Chen studied the charts while the Admiral poured himself a cup of Regelian coffee, his hands trembling slightly from exhaustion. The station commander hadn't slept properly in weeks, and it showed in his haggard expression.
"The public doesn't know yet," he said finally, settling behind his desk.
"We've been feeding the media stories about research expeditions and territorial disputes. But the truth is that we're looking at the potential extinction of galactic civilization." Dr. Chen traced the migration route with her finger. The swarm was following major stellar highways, consuming everything in its path.
Entire star systems were going dark as the creatures fed on stellar radiation and organic matter.
"How much time do we have?" she asked.
6 months, maybe 8 if we're lucky. The lead elements are already consuming the outer colonies in the Vega sector.
The Admiral's voice was hollow with despair. "Every major power has committed their full military capacity to stopping them.
The hegemony is preparing to deploy their antimatter fleet.
The Crystalline Collective is charging their stellar bombardment arrays.
Even the pacifist Iltar have begun constructing kinetic weapons."
Dr. Chen looked up from the charts. "And none of it will work. Our tactical analysis suggests we might destroy 10% of the swarm before our forces are overwhelmed. The adult Vorthax are each the size of a destroyer, with natural armor that can withstand direct nuclear strikes. They move through space at relativistic speeds and can regenerate from almost any injury."
"Admiral, what if everyone is approaching this wrong? What if the Vorthax aren't attacking at all?"
The statement hung in the air like a physical presence.
Admiral Kethran stared at the human scientist as if she had suggested the laws of physics were optional. "Dr. Chen, they've consumed 17 colonies in the past month alone. How is that not an attack?" Dr. Chen moved to the window overlooking the containment facility. Nova was still in its chamber, the puzzle sphere creating gentle light patterns in the dim illumination. What if they're running from something? What if this migration is an escape, not an invasion? The Admiral followed her gaze to the Vorthax below. Running from what? Their apex predators. What could possibly threaten them? "I don't know yet. But I'd like to find out." For the next 3 weeks, Dr. Chen spent every day with Nova, gradually building a relationship that defied everything the galaxy thought it knew about Vorthax.
The creature's intelligence became more apparent with each interaction, displaying problem-solving abilities that surpassed many supposedly advanced species. Nova learned to manipulate the chamber's holographic interface, creating complex three-dimensional models that seemed to represent stellar formations. The creature had an intuitive understanding of physics that allowed it to predict orbital mechanics and stellar evolution with startling accuracy. More importantly, Nova was learning to communicate through its bioluminescent patterns. Dr. Chen had developed a basic translation matrix, identifying emotional states and simple concepts. The breakthrough came when she realized that Nova's patterns weren't just visual but also electromagnetic, creating complex data structures that could convey abstract information. "It's like learning to read living art," Dr. Chen explained to the growing crowd of xenobiologists who had arrived to observe her work. Each pattern contains multiple layers of information. Emotional context, mathematical relationships, even memory fragments. Dr. Velix had become a convert to Dr. Chen's methods after witnessing Nova solve multi-dimensional puzzles that stumped her own research team. The implications are staggering. If this creature is representative of its species, we're not dealing with mindless predators. We're facing a civilization that communicates in ways we never imagined. The real breakthrough came during the 4th week of Dr. Chen's research. She had brought Nova a new puzzle, a complex crystalline structure that required manipulation of electromagnetic fields to solve. The creature tackled it with obvious enthusiasm, its patterns brightening with concentration. But, when Nova completed the puzzle, something unexpected happened. Instead of the usual satisfaction patterns, the creature's entire body erupted in violent reds and oranges. It backed away from the solved puzzle as if it had been burned, its massive form trembling with what could only be described as fear. "Nova, what's wrong?" Dr. Chen asked, moving closer despite the creature's obvious distress. The response was a cascade of images projected through Nova's bioluminescent patterns.
Dr. Chen's translation matrix struggled to process the complex data stream, but, gradually, a picture began to emerge. Stars going dark.
Not consumed, but simply extinguished as if they had never existed.
Vast shadows moving between galaxies, devouring light itself.
And, pursuing the fleeing vortex, something that made their terror seem perfectly rational. "Oh my God," Dr. Chen whispered, her face pale as she processed the implications.
"Nova, are you showing me why your people are running?"
The creature's pattern shifted to what Dr. Chen had learned meant affirmation.
But there was more.
Nova was trying to communicate something urgent, its patterns becoming increasingly frantic. The translation came through in fragments, warning.
"Danger. Following. Soon. Dr."
Chen activated her emergency communicator.
"Admiral Kethran, I need you in the containment facility immediately. And, bring every xenolinguist on the station."
20 minutes later, a hastily assembled team of experts watched in stunned silence as Nova repeated its warning. The creature had grown more agitated as more aliens entered the chamber, but it seemed to recognize the urgency of the situation. Dr. Velix's translation equipment was more sophisticated than Dr. Chen's portable unit, and the additional processing power revealed details that made everyone present go cold with fear. "It's saying the Vortex are refugees," Dr. Velix announced, her voice barely above a whisper. "They're fleeing something called the Void Devourers. Entities that consume reality itself, leaving nothing but empty space behind."
Admiral Kethran stepped forward. "How long before these devourers reach inhabited space?"
Nova's response was immediate and terrifying. The creature projected a stellar map using its natural bioluminescence, showing the current position of the Vortex fleet and the pursuing darkness behind it.
The mathematics were clear. The Void Devourers were 6 months behind the Vortex migration, following their trail like bloodhounds.
"This changes everything," Admiral Kethran said grimly.
"If the Vortex are running from something even worse." Dr. Chen was studying Nova's projections with growing excitement. "Admiral, look at this. Nova isn't just showing us the problem. It's showing us a solution." The creature's patterns had shifted to display complex tactical formations.
Vortex bioships working in coordination with conventional military vessels, creating defensive positions that could channel the Void Devourers into specific areas of space.
"It's a trap," Dr. Chen realized. "The Vortex know how to fight these things. They just can't do it alone." The implications hit Admiral Kethran like a physical blow. "You're suggesting we ally with the creatures we've been preparing to destroy." "I'm suggesting we work with them to save everyone." The emergency session of the Galactic Council was unlike anything in recorded history. Representatives who had been preparing for war against the Vortex migration found themselves listening to a human scientist propose an alliance with their supposed enemies. The debate was fierce and immediate. "Preposterous!" General Vextar roared. "You want us to trust the very creatures that have been consuming our colonies?"
Dr. Chen stood at the center of the great circular chamber, Nova's translated messages displayed on screens throughout the assembly.
"General, those colonies were already dead.
The Vortex were performing mercy kills, ending the suffering of populations that had been partially consumed by the Void Devourers."
The revelation sent shockwaves through the assembly.
Counselor Thane of the Rim Worlds leaned forward in his hover chair.
"Are you saying the outer colonies weren't attacked by Vortex?"
"They were attacked by the Void Devourers. The Vortex arrived afterward and found populations that had been changed.
Corrupted.
The only mercy was to end their existence before the corruption could spread."
Dr. Velix stood to address the assembly, her translation equipment humming with activity.
"Honored counselors, I have been studying the communication protocols Dr. Chen developed. The Vortex specimen has provided detailed intelligence about the Void Devourers. These entities exist partially outside normal spacetime, making them nearly impossible to detect until they strike."
"Then, how do we fight them?" demanded Admiral Tvor of the Central Defense Force.
Dr. Chen activated another series of translated messages from Nova.
"The Vortex have been fighting them for millennia.
Their entire biology has evolved to counter Void Devourer attacks.
Their bioluminescent patterns can disrupt the entity's electromagnetic signatures.
Their natural armor provides protection against reality distortion effects. The chamber erupted in excited chatter as the implications became clear.
Ambassador Thalmix raised a crystalline appendage for attention. Dr. Chen, are you proposing that we coordinate our defensive efforts with the Vorthak migration fleet? I'm proposing that we join them. The Void Devourers follow the Vorthaks because they're the only species that poses a real threat. If we can combine our technological capabilities with their biological adaptations, we might have a chance. The debate continued for hours, but the mathematics of the situation were undeniable. Alone, galactic civilization would fall to the Void Devourers within a year. Working with the Vorthaks, they might have a fighting chance. The final vote was closer than anyone expected, 147 in favor of alliance, 134 against, with 23 abstentions. It was enough to authorize Admiral Kethran to make contact with the Vorthak migration fleet. Dr. Chen returned to the containment facility to find Nova waiting for her, its patterns cycling through what she had learned to recognize as anxiety. The creature had been following the council proceedings through the station's communication arrays, demonstrating an understanding of galactic politics that surprised everyone. The council approved the alliance proposal, Dr. Chen announced as she entered the chamber.
Nova's reaction was immediate and profound. The creature's entire body erupted in brilliant patterns of joy and relief, creating a light show that was visible throughout the station. But the celebration was brief, replaced by urgent communication attempts. Through the translation matrix, Nova's message was clear: time was running short. The Void Devourers were accelerating their pursuit, drawn by the increased electromagnetic activity from galactic military preparations. The window for establishing an alliance was closing rapidly.
How do we make contact with your fleet? Dr. Chen asked. Nova's response involved complex electromagnetic signatures that would need to be broadcast on specific frequencies.
But there was a problem: the communication protocols required biological components that only Vorthaks could generate.
You need to be the translator, Dr. Chen realized. Nova, would you be willing to help us communicate with your people?
The creature's patterns shifted through several emotional states before settling on determination.
Nova was willing to serve as an intermediary, but the process would be dangerous.
Establishing contact with the migration fleet would also alert the Void Devourers to the station's location.
Admiral Kethran joined Dr. Chen in the containment chamber, his expression grim. Dr. Chen, our long-range sensors have detected course corrections in the Vorthak fleet. They're moving toward us. Nova's patterns confirmed the Admiral's report.
The fleet had received preliminary communication attempts from the station and was responding. But they were also bringing news that chilled everyone present. The Void Devourers had consumed 3 more star systems in the past week, accelerating their advance. They were adapting to galactic technology, becoming more efficient at reality manipulation. The window for effective resistance was shrinking.
How many ships in the migration fleet? Admiral Kethran asked through the translation system.
Nova's response was staggering: over 2 million bioships, ranging from scout-sized creatures to massive capital ships the size of moons. Each ship was a living Vorthak, capable of independent thought and action. The fleet wasn't just a military force, it was an entire civilization in motion.
My God, Admiral Kethran whispered. We've been preparing to fight an entire species.
Dr. Chen watched Nova's patterns shift to what she recognized as sadness.
Not fight. Understand.
The Vorthaks have been trying to warn us for decades, but every contact attempt was interpreted as aggression. The first Vorthak ships arrived at the station 3 days later. The sight of them was both terrifying and beautiful: massive organic vessels that pulsed with bioluminescent patterns, their forms flowing like living sculpture through space. Each ship was unique, evolved for specific roles within the fleet. The lead vessel was enormous, easily dwarfing the space station. As it approached, its hull patterns began synchronized communication with Nova, creating a light show that was visible across several star systems.
Dr. Chen stood at the observation deck, watching history unfold before her eyes. Through the translation matrix, she could sense the emotional reunion between Nova and the fleet elders.
The young Vorthak had been separated from its people for months, enduring isolation that was almost unimaginable for such a social species. Admiral Kethran joined her at the viewport, his expression mixing awe and apprehension.
Dr. Chen were receiving communication requests from 17 different Vorthak vessels.
They want to establish formal diplomatic contact. The first meeting between human and Vorthak representatives took place in the station's largest conference facility, hastily modified to accommodate beings that dwarfed most species. The Vorthak delegation consisted of 3 elders, each one a living ship that had compressed itself into a more compact form for the meeting. Elder Zarthys was the fleet's strategic commander, its patterns indicating thousands of years of experience fighting the Void Devourers.
Elder Velmoth served as the cultural ambassador, responsible for maintaining the social bonds that held Vorthak society together during their eternal migration.
Elder Krelax was their scientific leader, tasked with developing new weapons and defenses against their pursuers. Dr. Chen served as the primary translator, with Nova providing emotional context and cultural interpretation. The process was exhausting, requiring her to process multiple layers of information simultaneously while maintaining diplomatic protocols. The briefing that followed shattered every assumption galactic civilization had made about the nature of reality. The Void Devourers were not native to this universe. They were entities from a realm where physical laws operated differently, possibly refugees themselves from an even greater cosmic catastrophe. Their consumption of matter and energy was not malicious but necessary for their survival, like breathing for oxygen-dependent species.
They cannot stop, Elder Zarthys communicated through cascading patterns of light. To cease consuming is to cease existing.
They are as trapped by their nature as we are by our need to flee.
The revelation added a tragic dimension to the conflict. Both sides were fighting for survival, driven by biological imperatives that left no room for peaceful coexistence.
Elder Krelax provided tactical intelligence that revolutionized galactic understanding of the threat. The Void Devourers existed partially outside normal spacetime, making them nearly impossible to predict or track. They could appear anywhere without warning, consuming entire star systems in minutes. But they had weaknesses. Their extra-dimensional nature made them vulnerable to specific electromagnetic frequencies. Their reality-consuming ability had limits, particularly when faced with certain exotic matter configurations. Most importantly, they could be driven away if the cost of consumption exceeded the energy gained. The key is coordination, Elder Velmoth explained through patterns that spoke of hope and desperation. Alone, any species falls quickly. Together, we can make each target too expensive to consume. The alliance strategy that emerged from the meeting was unlike anything in galactic military history. Instead of traditional battle lines and defensive positions, they would create a web of interconnected resistance nodes. Each node would consist of Vorthak bioships working in conjunction with conventional vessels, creating overlapping fields of exotic radiation that would disrupt Void Devourer manifestation. Dr. Chen found herself appointed as the primary liaison between species, her unique understanding of Vorthak communication making her indispensable to the alliance effort. It was a responsibility that terrified and exhilarated her in equal measure. As the meeting concluded and the various delegates began planning the largest military cooperation in galactic history, Dr. Chen returned to Nova's chamber. The young Vorthak was no longer alone, several smaller creatures from the fleet had joined it, creating a complex social structure within the containment facility.
Are you ready for this? Dr. Chen asked Nova through the translation system.
The creature's response was complex, mixing determination with fear and hope. Nova had never experienced war against the Void Devourers directly, but it understood the stakes. Failure meant not just death but the complete erasure of everything they knew and loved. As Dr. Chen prepared to leave for the night, Nova's pattern shifted to display something that took her breath away. It was a representation of their first meeting, when she had placed her hand against the viewport. But Nova's version showed the moment from its perspective, emphasizing not the fear of a captive creature but the wonder of first contact with a being that offered understanding instead of exploitation.
Thank you, the translation system rendered Nova's message. Foreseeing person instead of monster. Dr.
Chen smiled, pressing her hand against the chamber wall one more time. Tomorrow, the real work would begin, forging an alliance between species that had been enemies hours before, preparing for a war against entities that defied comprehension, and somehow finding hope in the face of cosmic horror. But, tonight, she was simply Sarah Chen, a human scientist who had made a friend among the stars. The Nexus Prime Station had been transformed into the nerve center of the most ambitious military operation in galactic history. What had once been a simple frontier outpost now coordinated the movements of fleets from 47 different species, all working in unprecedented cooperation with the Vorthak Migration Armada. Dr. Chen stood before a holographic display that showed the current positions of over 3 million vessels spread across 17 star systems. The scale was breathtaking and terrifying. Red indicators marked the advancing Void Devourer front, while blue and green showed the Allied defense positions. Between them, a thin line of yellow markers represented the early warning network of volunteer ships whose crews knew they likely wouldn't survive first contact. Status report from Theta Station, announced Lieutenant Commander Yexla, one of the Mantarian officers who had been assigned to coordinate communications between the allied species. Her compound eyes clicked rapidly as she processed data from multiple sources simultaneously. Void Devourer advanced scouts detected at the edge of the Kepler Nebula. Estimated arrival at primary defensive positions in 72 hours. Admiral Kethran nodded grimly from his position at the Central Command Console. The past 6 weeks had aged him considerably, the stress of coordinating an impossible alliance taking its toll. Signal all fleet commanders. Begin Phase 1 deployment. Throughout the assembled task forces, the order rippled outward in dozens of different languages and communication protocols. Crystalline collective ships hummed with harmonic frequencies that made their hulls resonate like musical instruments. Hegemony vessels broadcast tactical data in compressed data bursts that painted temporary auroras in the vacuum of space. Kreloth battleships roared challenges that their crews believed would reach the enemy across the void. And, throughout it all, the Vorthak bioships pulsed with bioluminescent patterns that somehow managed to translate the chaos of multi-species cooperation into something approaching harmony. Dr. Chen had spent the past month developing communication protocols that allowed real-time coordination between beings whose thought processes were fundamentally different. It had required breakthrough work in xenolinguistics, quantum consciousness theory, and what she had started calling empathic mathematics, ways of expressing complex tactical information through emotional resonance rather than pure logic. Nova had been instrumental in the development process, serving as both translator and cultural bridge between the Vorthaks and the other Alliance species. The young creature had grown considerably during its time at the station, both physically and emotionally. What had once been a lonely, confused predator was now a confident ambassador for its species. Dr. Chen, Nova's translated voice came through the communication array. Elder HFY requests your presence at the fleet coordination meeting. She looked up from her analysis of Void Devourer consumption patterns to find Nova's image displayed on one of the communication screens. The creature was aboard the flagship bioship, having been granted the honor of serving as primary interpreter for the Allied command structure. Tell the Elder I'll be there in 10 minutes, Dr. Chen replied, gathering her research materials. The quantum communicator array that allowed near-instantaneous conversation across star systems was another product of the Alliance Terran technology enhanced by Vorthak biological computing and crystalline collective resonance amplification. The flagship bioship was a marvel of evolved biotechnology. As Dr. Chen's shuttle approached the docking bay, she could see the massive organism's hull rippling with thoughts and emotions. The ship wasn't just alive, it was aware, participating actively in tactical planning through a form of consciousness that spanned multiple star systems. Inside the command chamber, the atmosphere was thick with tension and anticipation. Representatives from every major species sat or hovered around a three-dimensional holographic display showing the current battlefield situation. At the center of the group, Elder HFY communicated through patterns that seemed to make the very air shimmer with meaning. Dr. Chen, the translation system rendered the Elder's greeting. We have received disturbing intelligence from our advanced scouts. The Void Devourers have changed their approach. The holographic display shifted to show recent sensor data from the perimeter warning stations. Instead of the chaotic, seemingly random consumption patterns they had observed before, the entities were moving with purpose and coordination. They're learning, Dr. Chen realized, studying the tactical formations. They've analyzed our defensive preparations and adapted their strategy accordingly. General Vextar, who had initially opposed the alliance but had since become one of its most dedicated supporters, leaned forward aggressively.
How much have they learned? Are our positions compromised?
Elder Krelax answered through a cascade of mathematical patterns that the translation system struggled to process. The scientific concepts involved were beyond most conventional understanding, dealing with multidimensional physics and reality manipulation on a cosmic scale. The Void Devourers appear to have developed countermeasures for our exotic radiation fields, Dr. Velix interpreted, her xenobiological expertise helping to clarify the complex concepts.
They're also showing signs of tactical coordination that suggests some form of collective intelligence. The implications were staggering.
If the Void Devourers were not just mindless consumers but actually an intelligent species capable of military planning, the entire defense strategy would need to be reconsidered.
Admiral Kethran's voice cut through the worried discussions.
Elders RTHYSS, in your people's experience fighting these entities, have they ever shown this level of coordination before? The response came through patterns of deep crimson and gold, emotional colors that spoke of ancient fear and hard-won wisdom.
Never to this degree, the translation system rendered.
The presence of organized resistance appears to have triggered some form of evolutionary response.
They are becoming more than they were. Dr. Chen felt a chill run down her spine. We're not just fighting for survival anymore.
We're forcing them to evolve into something more dangerous.
The strategic meeting that followed was unlike anything in military history. Instead of conventional tactical analysis, they found themselves exploring concepts that bordered on philosophy and metaphysics. How do you fight an enemy that exists partially outside reality? How do you predict the behavior of entities that can rewrite the laws of physics in localized areas?
The breakthrough came from an unexpected source. Nova, who had been quietly observing the discussions, suddenly erupted in brilliant patterns that filled the chamber with cascading light.
Wait, Dr. Chen said, raising her hand for silence as she processed the complex communication. Nova's suggesting something radical. It thinks the Void Devourers aren't just adapting to our tactics. They're trying to communicate. The statement sent shockwaves through the assembled commanders. Ambassador Thalnix's crystalline form chimed with resonant frequencies of disbelief. Communicate? Dr. Chen, these entities have consumed entire star systems. What could they possibly want to communicate about?
Dr. Chen studied Nova's patterns more carefully, cross-referencing them with the intelligence data from the forward scouts. Slowly, a picture began to emerge that changed everything they thought they knew about the conflict.
According to Nova's analysis, the Void Devourers' recent tactical changes aren't just adaptations for better consumption efficiency. They're attempts to minimize casualties while establishing control over specific territories. Elder Velmoth joined the conversation, its patterns mixing curiosity with cautious hope.
The cultural ambassador had spent millennia studying interspecies communication, and it recognized the implications of Nova's observations. The young one may be correct, the translation system conveyed. If the entities are attempting communication, their recent coordination patterns could be interpreted as attempts at establishing dialogue rather than simply improving their predation efficiency.
General Vextar's response was immediate and explosive. Preposterous. They've consumed 17 colonies. How is that an attempt at communication?
Nova's reply came through patterns so complex that they required multiple translation passes to render properly. The young Vorthak was proposing something that challenged the basic assumptions of both sides in the conflict.
What if the consumed colonies weren't attacks but responses to what the Void Devourers perceived as threats? Dr. Chen translated slowly. What if they were trying to neutralize weapons or technologies they saw as dangerous to their survival? The chamber fell silent as the implications sank in.
If the Void Devourers were reacting defensively rather than aggressively, the entire nature of the conflict would need to be re-examined.
Admiral Kethran was the first to break the silence. Dr. Chen, are you suggesting we attempt to establish communication with entities that exist partially outside normal spacetime? I'm suggesting we try to understand them before we commit to destroying them.
The debate that followed was intense and emotional. Military commanders who had spent months preparing for total war found themselves considering the possibility of diplomatic solution. Scientists who had studied the void devourers as mindless cosmic horrors were forced to confront the possibility that they were dealing with an intelligent species driven by needs and fears they didn't understand. The decision to attempt communication was made by a narrow margin, with many commanders expressing serious doubts about the safety and wisdom of the approach. But the mathematical reality was undeniable. Even with the full alliance, their chances of military victory were less than 30%. Diplomatic contact offered the possibility of a solution that didn't require the destruction of one species or the other. Dr. Chen found herself once again at the center of an unprecedented xenological challenge. How do you communicate with beings that exist partially outside the normal universe? How do you establish trust with entities that consume matter and energy as a basic biological function? The answer came through Nova's unique perspective on consciousness and communication. As a young Vorthak, it had experienced the universe differently from the older, more rigid patterns of thought common to both humans and the ancient Vorthak elders. Its mind was flexible enough to conceive of communication methods that transcended conventional physics. The first attempt at contact took place in the Kepler Nebula, a region of space where the boundary between normal matter and exotic energy was already unstable. 3 volunteer ships, 1 Vorthak bioship, 1 Terran research vessel, and 1 crystalline collective harmonic resonator took position at the edge of Void Devourer territory. Dr. Chen was aboard the Terran vessel, along with Nova and a carefully selected team of xenolinguists and consciousness researchers. The risks were enormous. If the communication attempt was interpreted as a threat, all 3 ships would likely be consumed within minutes. The initial contact protocol was based on Nova's theoretical framework for transdimensional communication. Instead of conventional electromagnetic signals, they would attempt to establish contact through controlled reality distortions, essentially speaking to the void devourers in their own language of spacetime manipulation. Beginning first communication sequence, Dr. Chen announced over the intership communication array. Throughout the small task force, exotic matter generators hummed to life, creating carefully patterned distortions in local spacetime. The response was immediate and overwhelming. Reality itself seemed to ripple around the 3 ships as something vast and incomprehensible turned its attention toward them. The sensors registered energy levels that should have destroyed anything within a light-year radius, but somehow the distortions remained contained and controlled. And then, slowly, a pattern emerged in the chaos. The void devourers were responding, their reality manipulations echoing and modifying the alliance signals in ways that suggested intelligent interpretation. "They're trying to communicate," Dr. Velix whispered from her position at the Xenobiological Analysis Station. The pattern modification showed deliberate intent and structured thought processes. The conversation that followed defied every conventional understanding of language and consciousness. Instead of words or images, concepts were exchanged through carefully controlled distortions in the fabric of spacetime itself. The process was exhausting and dangerous. Several team members collapsed from the mental strain of processing transdimensional information. But, gradually, through Nova's interpretation and Dr. Chen's linguistic analysis, a picture began to emerge. The void devourers were indeed refugees, fleeing from something even more terrible than themselves. Their consumption of matter and energy wasn't malicious but necessary for survival, like breathing for biological species. More shocking still, they were trapped in this universe by the same cosmic catastrophe that had driven them from their original realm. They wanted to return home but lacked the energy required to breach the dimensional barriers that separated realities. The colonies they had consumed contained technologies that generated specific types of exotic radiation that interfered with their attempts to return to their native dimension. From their perspective, they were neutralizing obstacles that prevented their escape from a universe where their very existence was a constant struggle for survival. "They're not trying to conquer our galaxy, Dr. Chen announced to the Allied command structure during the emergency briefing that followed first contact. "They're trying to leave it." The revelation fundamentally changed the strategic situation. Instead of fighting a war of extermination, they were dealing with a refugee crisis on a cosmic scale. The void devourers needed massive amounts of energy to breach the dimensional barriers, but their consumption was destroying the very civilizations that might be able to help them. Elders RTHYSS's response came through patterns of amazement and hope. "If this is accurate, it explains the cycles we have observed in their behavior.
They are not expanding their territory but searching for something specific. The solution that emerged from the subsequent negotiations was as ambitious as it was unprecedented. The allied species would help the Void Devourers gather the energy they needed to return to their native dimension, but the process would require careful coordination to avoid catastrophic side effects. The plan involved using the combined technological resources of galactic civilization to create controlled star lifting operations, carefully extracting matter and energy from selected stars and converting it into the exotic forms required for dimensional translation. The process would be dangerous and expensive, but it offered the possibility of resolving the crisis without genocide. Nova played a crucial role in the negotiations, serving as an interpreter for concepts that existed at the boundaries of physics and consciousness. The young Vorthack's flexible thinking allowed it to bridge the gap between the Alliance's scientific approach and the Void Devourer's reality-based communication methods. The first joint operation took place 6 weeks after initial contact. A carefully selected star system, already scheduled for natural collapse within a few million years, was chosen as the test site. Alliance engineering teams worked alongside Void Devourer entities to extract stellar matter and convert it into dimensional transition energy. Dr. Chen watched from the command ship as reality itself seemed to bend and flow around the operation. The sight was both beautiful and terrifying, streams of pure energy flowing between dimensions while carefully maintained gravitational fields prevented the process from destroying nearby star systems. Stellar extraction at 97% efficiency, reported Commander Yexlaw. Dimensional translation energy reaching target thresholds. The moment of truth came when the first group of Void Devourers attempted to use the gathered energy to return to their native realm. The process created a temporary rift between dimensions that was visible across several sectors, a wound in spacetime that glowed with impossible colors. And then, they were gone. Several hundred entities simply vanished from normal space, returning to whatever realm they had originally inhabited. The relief throughout the Allied fleet was palpable. But the celebration was premature. Long-range sensors detected new Void Devourer formations approaching from deep space, larger groups that had been following the migration patterns of the first wave. The process would need to be repeated dozens of times to evacuate all the entities trapped in normal space. Over the following months, the Alliance refined their dimensional extraction techniques. What had started as a desperate attempt to avoid extinction evolved into something approaching a partnership. The Void Devourers provided insights into transdimensional physics that revolutionized galactic science, while the Alliance offered the technological infrastructure needed for systematic dimensional translation. Dr. Chen found herself at the center of the most significant xenological breakthrough in history. Her daily conversations with Nova had evolved into complex discussions about consciousness, reality, and the nature of existence itself. The young Vorthack had become not just a translator but a philosopher, helping both sides understand perspectives that had previously been incomprehensible. The Void Devourers don't experience time the way we do, Nova explained during one of their regular sessions. For them, past and future exist simultaneously. That's why they seem to anticipate our tactics. They weren't predicting our actions, they were remembering them from their perspective. The insight led to breakthroughs in temporal mechanics that would have taken galactic science centuries to achieve independently. By working with beings that experienced reality fundamentally differently, the Alliance gained access to perspectives that transformed their understanding of the universe itself. The final evacuation operation took place exactly 1 year after Dr. Chen's first meeting with Nova. The last group of Void Devourers was the largest, requiring the coordinated effort of every major industrial facility in the galaxy to generate sufficient dimensional transition energy. Dr. Chen stood on the observation deck of Nexus Prime, watching as the final rift between dimensions opened in the space where the crisis had begun. Through the breach, she could see glimpses of the Void Devourer's native realm, a place where the laws of physics operated according to principles that her mind could barely comprehend. The entities passed through the rift in a pattern that seemed almost ceremonial, their reality-distorting presence creating light shows that would be remembered for generations. As the last of them vanished into their home dimension, the rift began to close, sealing the breach between realities. Nova stood beside her, its patterns cycling through emotions that had no names in any galactic language. The young Vorthack had grown enormously during the crisis, evolving from a confused predator into something approaching a cosmic diplomat. It's over, Dr. Chen said simply, watching the stars return to their normal configurations as the dimensional distortions faded.
No, Nova replied through the translation system, its patterns shifting to display concepts of hope and possibility.
It's beginning. First contact with transdimensional intelligence. Proof that different forms of consciousness can cooperate despite fundamental incompatibilities. Foundation for future when galaxy encounters other refugees from cosmic catastrophes. Dr. Chen smiled, recognizing the wisdom in Nova's perspective.
The crisis had ended, but the relationships and technologies developed during the emergency would reshape galactic civilization for millennia to come. The Vortak migration fleet had settled into established territories, no longer refugees but respected members of the galactic community. Their bioships served as living research stations, exploring the boundaries between biology and technology. The alliance protocols developed during the crisis became the foundation for a new era of interspecies cooperation. And, at the center of it all, a simple friendship between a human scientist and a young predator had become the seed of transformation that changed the entire galaxy. As Dr. Chen prepared to return to Earth for the first time in over a year, Nova's final message followed her through the quantum communication network. Thank you for seeing person instead of monster.
For choosing understanding instead of fear.
For teaching galaxy that friendship possible even between most different minds. The message would be preserved in the archives of every major species, a reminder that the greatest breakthroughs in galactic history had begun with a single act of compassion toward a creature that everyone else had seen as an enemy. Dr. Sarah Chen had come to a frontier station to study an alien predator. She was leaving as the architect of a new era in galactic civilization, having proven that the most powerful force in the universe wasn't technology or weaponry, but the simple human capacity to recognize consciousness and dignity in beings that seemed completely alien. The stars themselves seemed brighter as her ship departed Nexus Prime, carrying with it the promise of a future where understanding would always triumph over fear, and where the vast diversity of galactic life would be seen not as a threat to be overcome, but as a symphony of consciousness waiting to be heard.